The most common and profitable engine for the VW Touareg is the 3.0 TDI. There are about 5 versions of these motors, i.e. 5 power levels. But, in essence, all these engines are literally identical. Although in the first years until the summer of 2011 Touareg 2 was equipped with first-generation engines, designated CASA, CATA. They have 4 separate timing chains, including the oil pump chain. For second-generation engines, all 4 camshafts are connected by one chain, plus a separate chain drives the oil pump and injection pump. All V6 TDIs in this Touareg are very durable. They can travel more than 700,000 kilometers without major repairs and without serious problems. If you are lucky with high-quality fuel, the injectors will last up to 500,000 kilometers, the high-pressure fuel pump will not wear out, and even the turbine, there is only one for V6 engines, will last up to 500,000 kilometers. The key to success is changing the oil every 10,000 kilometers, or even earlier if the car is used in urban areas. Let's start with oil leaks that appear with mileages of more than 200,000 kilometers. There is an opinion that if oil fogging appears at the rear, then it is the crankshaft oil seal that has leaked. But before changing it, you need to see if oil is leaking from somewhere above. The fact is that the cast iron cylinder block of this engine is screwed to the aluminum crankshaft bed. Oil may appear along this joint. As a rule, the outbreak appears in the area near the starter. This is on the passenger side and can stretch to the front engine cover. And this is the most unpleasant case, because you need to have the engine clean the joint between the cylinder block and the crankcase, and seal it with new sealant, D174000382, tighten it with new bolts. By the way, the cause of depressurization is said to be the pulling out of the standard bolts. Further, in the rear cover of these motors there are plug bushings, 057103147A. There are only 2 pieces, one next to the starter, the other is diametrically opposite and on the driver's side. Over time these plugs dry out and begin to leak oil. You need to buy new plugs and put them on new sealant. True, to do this you will have to disconnect the engine from the transmission. And if you and your service technician are sure that there is a leak at the back of the engine, but both indicated places are in order, then you should change the rear crankshaft oil seal 079100351F. At the front, with high mileage, fogging may appear on the front cover 059103150N, usually on the right side, along the front crankshaft oil seal 079103051D. You may also need to reseal the pan. There is no gasket, just a layer of sealant. On these V6 TDIs from around 2012, the oil filter is located at the front in a separate plastic housing, 059115389P, with a thermostat and is sealed to the block with a pair of gaskets. By the mileage of 200,000 kilometers, an oil leak may appear here, and the housing itself may even crack. In the original, all this is sold together as one part, costing up to $450. On older versions of these V6 TDIs, the oil filter sticks out from the camber of the cylinder block. It also has a plastic case, but there is no thermostat, and there are no problems with cracks. And, of course, all these V6 TDIs will sooner or later develop a leak from under the heat exchanger, which is located in the camber of the cylinder block. Oil, antifreeze, or altogether may leak into the camber. These fluids can mix in the system. For later engines, the entire kit with a new heat exchanger and gaskets 059117015P costs from $100 to $400 for the original, although all the necessary gaskets can be purchased separately. Timing chains on both old and newer 3.0 TDI engines last well, more than 400,000 kilometers. Their stretching can be diagnosed in the software. There is a parameter camshaft adaptation. If this parameter is -3.5 degrees, -4.0 degrees, then the circuits will already begin to make noise. And at a value of about -6 degrees they can jump. True, sometimes chains can rustle after a morning start, the tensioners are to blame. If the camshaft adaptation angle does not indicate severe wear, then you can limit yourself to only replacing the tensioners. But you still have to remove the rear engine cover, and before that, lower the entire engine. The first generation engines have swirl flaps in both intake manifolds, 059129711DC and 059129712BS, but they have problems both with the rods and with them themselves. The second generation V6 TDI has only one flap. It simply opens or closes one common vortex channel. The servo drive for such a damper is located in the intake track directly above the pump pulley, and the pipeline itself is plastic, not light alloy, like the older CASA type motor. Old CASA type engines also have a toothed belt for driving the injection pump, 059109119F. If it breaks, the injection pump will simply stop pumping fuel and the engine will stall. There is one nuance with the fuel injectors of all these engines: they're fireproof washers. 059130519B burn out early, but at the same time all the gases escaping from the cylinders come out through special channels drilled into the cylinder head. A clear sign of burnout washers is piles of a black tar-like substance on the surface of the exhaust manifolds near the cylinder head. You should not hesitate to replace the washers, because then the sprayer of the corresponding nozzle may overheat. It can even end with fuel overflowing into the cylinder. The second generation V6 TDI engines also receive single-layer cylinder head gaskets from the factory, 059103383JP and 059103383JL, due to which it is more sensitive to overheating. Therefore, the main radiator must be kept clean and not rely on chip tuning. There are cases of puncture of such gaskets. Yes, we, of course, talked a lot about V6 TDI engines. And, most likely, all these things will appear on literally each of them. They just appear every 200,000 kilometers or even less often. Let us separately remember about the EGR system and gears in the throttle valve. All this occurs at high mileage and can be solved inexpensively. V8 TDI 340 horsepower, CKDA. The most powerful diesel engine for the second generation Touareg was a 4.2, or rather, 4.1 liter Bitturbo diesel. This engine is an 8-cylinder version of the first generation V6 engines. It has 4 chains on the flywheel side, an oil filter in the camber of the cylinder block, and has swirl flaps. Everything said applies to him too. The Bitturbo diesel V8 is reliable, durable, and not much more expensive to maintain. 3.6 V6, VR6, FSI 249 horsepower, CGRA, 3.6 V6, VR6, FSI 280 horsepower, CMTA. Not surprisingly, Touareg is much less common with a gasoline engine. If you come across one, it will most likely be a car with a 3.6-liter engine. Moreover, it will not be V6, but VR6, i.e. engine with one-cylinder head and inline displaced cylinder arrangement. It has a cast iron block, a timing chain drive, and direct injection. And this engine is very reliable. A worthy, but power-hungry, not as high torque replacement for diesel if the diesel fuel around is of poor quality. Beware of the 2 timing chains can also be assessed by camshaft adaptation. The value should be from 0 degrees to -7 degrees. Sometimes, due to stretching of the chains, this motor simply crashes when it reaches 4,000 revolutions per minute. The situation is similar to the wear of the fuel injection pump. The petrol VR6 has even fewer points where oil can leak. The troubles with it are standard. Sometimes you need to change the ignition coils, the VKG membrane, and other little things. Oil burns may occur if you skimp on oil, filling with low-quality oil, and do not change it for a long time. In this generation, the Touareg comes with 2 more petrol versions, and they are incredibly rare. 3.6 V6 TSI Hybrid 333 plus 34 horsepower, CGFA. This is a hybrid version with a 3-liter V6 TFSI. This motor is equipped with an Eaton supercharger. This engine is prone to oil consumption, and the destruction of the catalyst kills its cylinder piston group. 4.2 V8 FSI 360 horsepower, CGNA. The latest powertrain option for the Touareg 2 is a naturally aspirated 4.2-liter V8. Also not a fountain. Spraying on the surface of aluminum cylinders does not last very long due to problems with gasoline and catalysts, and scuffing occurs. The timing chains barely survive up to 150,000 kilometers. The intake manifold bursts. It often comes to the point where the crankshaft jams. This is the worst badge engine of that time. Aisin TR-80SD, Knoll Svosim 8 Street automatic transmission. In the second generation, all Touaregs were 2-pedal, equipped with a Japanese 8-speed automatic transmission TR-80SD. This is a super reliable transmission. If the engine is not chipped, then it can easily take care of more than 400,000 kilometers before overhaul. The filter in at 0C8 325-435 is changed after removing the pan. For a partial oil change, 6 liters of Toyota WS type fluid, or original G05554OA2, is usually enough. Separately, we note that you need to monitor the safety of the cooling radiator of this transmission. The radiator 7P0317019 is located at the very bottom of the package and is blown with air through the lowest slot in the bumper. Stones can easily pierce it, and after some time the reagents will cause through corrosion. You can be left without ATF while driving. The second generation Touareg was equipped with two types of transfer cases. The first option is based on a Torsen self-locking differential, without a reduction row in the transmission. Optionally for cars with a diesel V6, a Terrain Tech package was offered with a 2-speed transfer case and a locking central and rear differential. The Touareg has no problems with the all-wheel drive transmission. Everything is strong and reliable. Oil of different grades is poured into the transfer cases. G052536A2 for Torsen, G055515A2 for electronically locked. 1 liter is enough for replacement. The oil in gearboxes can also be changed. There are drain and filler plugs, 1 liter of oil. G052145S2 is enough for each gearbox. The air suspension of the second generation Touareg is also good. Its system is closed, is filled with nitrogen, and there is no moisture there. Although the system communicates with air, the compressor draws in air from the intake tract behind the air filter. The compressor itself is installed on the bottom on the front right. When the seals begin to bleed nitrogen, causing the compressor to turn on more often, air and moisture will begin to enter the system. Moisture can cause freezing in winter. Depending on the climate and operating conditions, it is recommended that once every 1 to 2 years for prevention before winter, pump nitrogen into the system and change the desiccant in the compressor. On average, the compressor itself lasts more than 200,000 kilometers if the system is dry, i.e. without moisture. There are repair kits for the compressor, so there is no problem in repairing it inexpensively. The rear left arch houses the rear air conditioning circuit pipes. Moisture causes them to corrode or crack due to the fastener breaking off. This problem is easily solved by replacing the tubes with hoses. An autonomous heater is installed in the front left wheel arch on the engine shield side. Not all machines have it, but if it is present, you should check its functionality. We are talking about the heater Eberspacher Hydronic 2 Series D5. It is known for the fact that it lives for about 200,000 kilometers, and then in its ECU, due to temperatures and vibrations, the soldering deteriorates, and the contact of the electronic components with the board disappears. Specifically, the Touareg version of the heater 7P08150008D is very difficult to repair. And most often you have to buy a used one or a new one, which is very expensive. In rare cases, it is possible to get by replacing temperature sensors, 252,526,990,121, but they still do not eliminate problems with the ECU. Let's return to the radiators. You need to look after them and wash them from dirt. We have already talked about the automatic transmission radiator. Attention should also be paid to the pipes connected to it. They sometimes become very corroded and leak. The same thing happens to the power steering radiator, 7P54228885A, due to dirt and moisture. Intercoolers for diesel engines are installed in the cheeks of the front bumper. Dirt flies onto them both from the front and from the side of the wheels. Intercoolers also need to be washed at least every spring. The Touareg 2 suspension has proven to be pleasantly resilient and will remain so with the original parts. The front stabilizer struts were the first to start knocking here, with runs of about 70,000 kilometers. They cost between $10 and $50 for the original. 7L0411 Front stabilizer bushings last 100,000 kilometers and cost up to $15 a piece per half ring. There are 4 of them in total at the front. The first silent block to fail is the rear hydraulic one, 7L0407-182G. It cracks and leaks, and it costs from $20 to $90. There are 2 other silent blocks in the lever at the front. The internal subframe also costs up to $90. 7L041233A, and the other one at the shock-absorbing strut mounting point, 7L0407-183A, will cost from $6 to $40. The silent blocks of the upper arms, 7P0400-7077, and ball joints on these machines last more than 200,000 kilometers. In the rear suspension of cars with air struts, dirt often accumulates underneath the boot ring. There, corrosion causes swelling of the sealing rings, 7P061645 and N90367701, which ends in depressurization of the cylinder. In versions with spring suspension, long-term attack by reagents sometimes leads to breaking of the lower coils of the springs. The rear suspension of the Touareg has 4 levers. You can buy separately only the lowest silent block of the trunnion, 7L0407-183A. It costs from $10 to $40. After 150,000 kilometers, it may be necessary to replace the upper arm, 7L0505-323A, and camber link 7P0501-529, due to wear of their silent blocks. These levers originally cost $170 and $110 respectively, and substitutes range from $25 to $60. Non-original silent blocks for them are sold separately. The brake system of the Touareg 2 is in perfect order. The brakes are powerful, front calipers with either 4 or 6 pistons. The mechanisms are not capricious, original or high-quality discs and pads last a long time. Once every 150,000 kilometers, versions with air suspension will have to change the ride height sensors. 7P0616-571. They cost from $40 to $200. At high mileage, reagents can damage the silent blocks of the rear subframe. The rear one's 7P6599-035 cost about $130 each, and the front one's 7L8599-035D cost between $90 and $130. Well, in general, the Touareg suspension has no obvious problems. The older the second generation Touareg, the more closely you need to monitor its body or inspect such an old car with mileage. The original factory paint may bulge on the roof, along the windshield. Also, spots of blistering paint may appear on the pillars to the left and right of the windshield. The chips on the hood, if left bare, will also begin to swell after a couple of winters. Signs of corrosion may appear at the rear around the center brake light and also under the license plate. It happens that paint chips on the side doors, in places near the lower moldings and door edges. By the way, chrome moldings often already look bad. They become cloudy, covered with scratches and dots. If the second generation Touareg is equipped with keyless entry, then after driving more than 200,000 kilometers, this system may stop working. Its sensors are located in the handles themselves. Moisture gets in there and kills the small chip. If the open circuit error appears in the system, then there is a chance to get away with soldering. But you will have to not only remove the door handle, but also open it with a drill to get to the electronic board. If the electronics in the handle are dead, then you need to change the entire handle and paint the donor in the body color. There are Chinese handles with keyless entry sensors for $50 to $60. A common problem with these Touaregs is a faulty trunk lock. It either won't unlock or won't lock. The problem lies in the breakdown of the worm gear in its actuator. A new lock costs from $60 to almost $300 for the original 7P0827505G. You can buy another original lock that fits Passat, Touran, Golf, 1P0827505D9B9, and other Volkswagen models. This one costs between $25 and $110. It contains the same plastic worm gear that can be installed in the Touareg lock. On older Touaregs, the problem with the failure of the rear windshield wiper is increasingly emerging. The fact is that dust and dirt from outside gets into its gearbox. If the boot under the leash is cracked and stiff, liquid from the windshield wiper system can also get into the gearbox and cause corrosion. Usually everything is solved simply and inexpensively by cleaning the gears of the gearbox and lubricating it, installing new seals to replace worn ones. A new rear wiper drive costs between $100 and $350 for the original 7P6955711B. Over time, water can get into the rear roof antenna. It's probably worth removing it as a precaution and checking the quality of the seals and the wire entry into it. Owners of these cars need to keep the drains located under the windshield clean. From there are small tubes that drain water behind the front lockers. The lockers need to be removed and the drains cleared of leaves and dirt. Otherwise, water after rain or after washing will get into the cabin. First of all, the carpet in the front part of the cabin will get wet. At high mileage, a situation occurs when the fuel gauge needle hangs in one position and does not move. In a certain situation, she may come to life, but everything will happen again. This is due to a faulty potentiometer on one of the two fuel level sensors. Each sensor is installed in the left and right half of the tank. A non-original sensor costs about $80 and an original one costs about $220. 7P0919673J. The interior of the Touareg 2 does not age for a long time and retains an acceptable appearance. The steering wheel braid is unlikely to age at 200,000 kilometers, although it will certainly look polished. The start-stop button on these cars may look scratched and worn. All other traces of use depend on the care of the owner. The second generation Touareg may have one 7P0820021B or two fans in the climate control system. If the climate control is 4-zone, then the second fan, 4B0867276A, is installed at the rear left behind the trunk trim. Both fans begin to squeak and whistle over time. If you turn on the maximum blowing speed, then after a few minutes the fans may turn off and after 5 minutes they will start working again. But ultimately it will end in their complete refusal. To overcome the performance problem, you need to remove the fan and evaluate the condition of its carbon brushes. Often they are simply worn out, so the fan does not work. If the fan is simply still glitching, i.e. works at maximum speed intermittently, then you need to disassemble the built-in control unit, and then check for resistors and solder those that have broken contact with the board. A new original fan costs between $140 and $400 for an original,